This Saturday, the best in the West collide in the UFA Game of the Week. Salt Lake and Colorado. Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern, broadcasting exclusively on WatchUFA.tv.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That is Cameron Brock. We've got 11 games of Week 4 preview pod to get to tonight, so we have no time to spare here at the top of the episode. But starting with the headlines, maybe the biggest of them all, the reigning champion New York Empire, coming off of a bye week in Week 3, will be facing off against the reigning MVP and longtime Empire captain Jeff Babbitt in one of the most anticipated matchups of the 2024 season. That will happen on Friday night. Elsewhere in the league, Salt Lake going on a critical 2-game road trip starting on Friday in Oakland, and then on Saturday in the league's game of the week, going to Colorado and facing the Summit for a chance at the best in the West. Salt Lake currently sitting at 3-0, Colorado at 1-0. Both teams have claimed the last 2 West Division titles. Whoever has won the season series has gone on to claim that division. So a very crucial battle in the West here in Week 4. There were 9 other games. Cameron, you're coming off of your first game. You've got a big battle at Atlanta in this not at Atlanta, but against Atlanta this upcoming weekend. What are you looking forward to in this coming slate of games?
Obviously, my game. Really looking forward to playing Atlanta. You know, this will be our 4th time playing them since 2019. So we're starting to become a little bit of regulars against each other. I mean, you know, when Jeff Babbitt was first announced as going to Boston, this was a game we talked about. We talked about what would it be like in that first matchup? We wondered, what would Boston look like coming into this game? We didn't have a lot of questions at that time about how New York would look, which now is the bigger question. What's New York going to look like? I think that is the game I'm most intrigued by because of those reasons. New York did not look good really in either of their first 2 games. Boston has looked pretty good. They still look like they're muddling around a little bit on offense, trying to figure out exactly how to get that flow down. But they were obviously very competitive with DC. And I've been really excited all offseason about this Salt Lake and Colorado rivalry. I think this is the year where we might see one team not just dominate the other team across the season. Colorado won all their matchups in year 1 of their existence in the league, and Salt Lake won all the matchups last year. I think this year we might see maybe a split, maybe a 1-1, and with Colorado being at home hosting a Salt Lake team that's going to be playing the day before, man, it sounds like a recipe for a Colorado win. But we'll get into that one later. Let's start off with that New York-Boston game on Friday night, which I cannot wait for.
Yeah, and don't look past Oakland either. I think they've proven themselves to be quite a formidable foe, even if it's not the cleanest ultimate. But you're right. Let's get to the beasts in the East. New York at Boston on Friday night. I other than the game of the week, this really feels like the 1A matchup. To your point, obviously with Babbitt facing off against his former team, but even across sports, New York-Boston just has a different level and flavor of rivalry to it. There isn't quite, I think, a compatible regional tilt like New York versus Boston. I mean, you see it in baseball, football, basketball, hockey. It's just prevalent almost in any sense of the word sport, right? Is these 2 cities facing off. And now we have it in this league. I think we've been trying to blow air into this matchup for the past couple of seasons, but it's been completely dominated by the Empire, and rightfully so. I mean, Boston is now in their 4th season in the league and still kind of finding their footing. You know, they're coming off of their first playoff win. They're 3-1 now in the new season. They clearly got a lot of momentum. But to your point about where they're at, it feels like their offense is a lot more stable, I would say, in its fundamentals than it ever has been. The sort of core around Babbitt and Simon Carapella, Tanner Johnson Go, Tyler Chan, as well as Ben Sadoke, Kalen McSweeney in the backfield. Captain Ned Dick has stepped up very well in his new facilitator role. There's a lot of good pieces, but it isn't exactly swinging for the fences all the time. Like, it's a pretty contained unit on offense. But the Boston defense, I feel like, has been quasi-formidable in the past. In this season, it feels like it's turned up a notch. Maybe that's the presence of the other New York addition that they added this offseason in Ben Katz, as well as some other rookie talent. Maybe that's just finally kind of getting to the point in their franchise's career where they're able to establish a defensive system. This Glory team, I think, in years past, has very much been defined by how it can own one-on-one matchups and not much outside of that as far as schematics or approach to a game, right? I think you saw it in parts last season, but also it felt like a lot of kind of pickup ball, so to speak. I'm interested to see how New York's maybe still looking to establish itself play style fares against this Boston team that is developing a system, but has a lot more, I think, confidence in his one-on-one matchups.
I still have so many questions. I heard an interview or a snippet from, why am I blanking? Coach Nunez. Jeez. And he said things were not going to be the same, or he made some reference or allusion to things were going to be changed up a little bit after their Atlanta game. I wasn't sure what that meant. I assumed it meant something offensively. I do see that Sean Keegan's not dressing this game. He's not active. I wonder if maybe that was a change that they were wanting to make and not maybe an availability thing. I think my biggest question is with a Glory team that does look much more formidable defensively and seems to have a little bit more punch with the disc too when they get it, and the New York offense kind of struggling. That's like where I'm really wanting to see, like, what can this New York offense do against this Glory defense, and who's even going to be playing offense for the Empire without I don't even know the 7 players that are going to be out there. I assume a few of them we probably know. Solomon Rushmar Bailey.
Well,
I'm sure Ben
they
Yard,
are missing a couple of
Williams.
notable starters on offense. To your point about Keegan, they'll also be down Elliot Chartok, who did not start in the first game for the Empire, but was in the Atlanta loss. There's just questions, right? And again, like Ryan Osgar has not returned to this team. They're now down
Randolph.
ostensibly 4 offensive starters from where they ended last year, raising a trophy.
And John Randolph's not going to be there either. And he's been, we saw, especially in that Montreal game, he was spelling some time over on offense. So that's not going to be the move. So this is a dangerous weekend for the Empire. I know we're not probably going to get into too much of their second matchup, but they got to go to Montreal the next day too. And this is going to be a long weekend for them, but it starts Friday night in Boston. And I mean, who do you think's, I feel like we have to just be expecting that we're just going to see a monster game out of Jeff Babbitt, right? Like, I feel like the more of the emotion is over on that side. Like the Empire, I feel like are just sad to not have him. Whereas for Jeff Babbitt, I mean, it seemed like there was a little bit of some bad feelings there, and he was bearing the brunt of those bad feelings. So I can't really get into Babbitt's headspace. I don't think he's one who needs extra motivation, but I feel like if there's a time to have it, it's going to be here, like hosting your former team and wanting to kind of show them what they missed out on.
So let's talk a little bit about the reigning MVP. He's started in all 4 games for Boston. They're now 3-1, their best start as a franchise. He currently sits 4th overall in plus minus for the year. Now Boston has played a handful of more games than other teams. They're at 4. You guys in Indy, for example, are at 1. Yeah. So just keep that in mind. But he's already at 10 goals, 7 blocks. He's only got a single turnover in those 4 games. And yeah, we've talked about it a little bit here on this show. It felt like he's been playing a little throttled. It feels like he's very much picking his spots. He's not really forcing anything. he's much more involved in kind of cycling into almost a backfield throwing role at times, particularly as the team starts to work down into the red zone area. One of the things that I think is most interesting about this Boston team is that with so many late additions right before the start of the season, it's felt like different areas of their lineups have sort of begun to form into little pods of 2 to 3 players at a time, and it hasn't always fleshed out into a full 7 lineup quite yet. Mm-hmm. But Babbitt, along with Simon Carapella and his former college teammate Ben Sadok, those 3 form a very interesting nucleus that can generate a lot of action in small spaces for this Boston team, which is not necessarily something that the Glory offense has had much in the past. This has been a team that has relied a lot on the deep ball to, even last year with Carapella in deep space, they would shoot a lot into just kind of runners out into space for him to run on to. Tanner Johnson-Go gets a lot of jump balls. Orion Cable, who will not be active in this matchup against New York and has had success being a big in space for Boston, he's existed a lot on kind of 50-50 chances downfield. This Boston team has not necessarily been one to focus a lot, I think, on efficacy when it comes to offense, right? They're a little bit more of just throwing things out there and seeing what works. And it feels like with Babbitt now at the center generating a lot more of their action, there's more structure. I wonder if that is good against New York, or if New York is so used to kind of playing around a sort of style of Babbitt, if they're able to poach a little bit more into space. I mean, you mentioned John Randolph won't be available in this game. Mike Drost is also questionable for New York's defense. But we've talked about it before. This Empire D-line is still absolutely loaded top to bottom. It will be interesting to see, per your comment from Coach Nunez from New York, if maybe a Antoine Davis shift to offense happens. He's been known to be a little explosive as a scorer in this league in the past. Yeah. But it's been a couple of years. I'm sure he could kind of reprise that role, no doubt about it. But, just kind of wondering, getting back to the point of Babbitt, do you think that New York has an opportunity to be so familiar with how he likes to play that they can anticipate how he's moving around in small spaces for this Boston offense?
There might be some of that. It's hard to say. We've talked about this offline, but it almost sometimes feels like Jeff Babbitt's a square peg in a round hole in this offense because, he's a guy we've seen make so many plays by stretching deep and having these deep shots go up to him. And, Boston doesn't really have the arms in terms of like throwing distance that Babbitt was used to playing with in New York.
They do. He doesn't have a rapport with them. So one of the other interesting pods that's forming for this Boston offense is the Tanner Johnson-Go to Tyler Chan connection, which does have a lot of velocity and range and speed to it. But Babbitt hasn't quite synced up with Tanner, it feels like, yet.
Yeah. Feels like he's been more working off of Sadok, which makes sense. They were college teammates. And you're right. It does feel a lot more structured offensively for them. Sometimes it almost feels restrictive.
I'm glad you brought that up.
They're doing more thinking about what they're supposed to do instead of just playing. I think you could really see it in the DC game, which makes sense. DC is the best team that they had played so far, especially defensively. And so it makes sense that they were challenged more there. But you could just see the stagnation. There were times where they had the disc. And a lot of it was when Babbitt was getting a disc. It's like they'd get the disc up 5 or 6 yards, and then they'd lose 20 yards, and then they'd gain the 20 yards back, but then they would be in the same latitude on the field for 10 throws in a row, and it's just it felt so stalled out, and it really did feel like there's just maybe not on the same page. Like you mentioned, they had so many players that were added to the roster just before the season. Jeff Babbitt being one of them. I can't imagine they got too many reps in practice. So I think the offense is going to get better as the season goes on. It's not like DC looked great last week either. That could have just been a one-off game for both of them. But the thing I do really like about this Boston offense is their ability to go get the disc back if they do turn it over. I mean, having Jeff Babbitt, who is one of the best defenders in the league, on that line certainly is helping with that. But I don't know. I think this is going to be a scrappy game. I don't anticipate. I think it will probably be pretty low scoring, not as low scoring as the DC Boston game last week. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the total score in this game only being around 30 goals. Like I could totally see a game like that because I think both offenses are going to struggle a little bit because I think there's going to be a lot of defensive pressure. I think especially New York with their talented defenders, and then on the flip side of that, their offense has been struggling and Boston's been pretty stout. So I feel like it's going to be low scoring. It's probably going to be a 1 or 2 goal game. I can't imagine it would get out of hand one way or the other.
So Babbitt is currently tied right now for second overall on blocks. Again, Boston is tied for the most played games of any team in the league right now. So take that with a grain of salt. But we all know what Babbitt can do in any sort of situation where he's playing in coverage. I wanted to get to Boston's defense for a second because I think that that's the true X factor in this matchup. With the other caveat to that being how New York's offense has been playing through their first 2 games. Last year, and actually going back in their last 4 matchups dating back to 2022, Boston has just 8 total breaks in their last 4 games against the Empire. Currently, this year in 2024, through 4 games, they rank 7th overall with 7.5 breaks a game. And I think one of the biggest questions of this Friday night matchup comes down to which version of the glory are we going to see, and which on defense, and which version of the Empire offense are we going to see? Are we going to see a kind of return to form for the reigning champs? Are they going to sort of figure out at least how to possess a little bit better and not look so tentative? And for Boston, can they continue to bring the pressure as they have in their first 4 games in 2024, or will they sort of find themselves in similar situations that they have in the past against the Empire where maybe they're able to pressure underneath, but there just isn't enough discipline elsewhere to really stymie anything New York wants to do on offense?
Well, and you mentioned how they haven't been able to break over the last several games. They only have 8 over the last 4. I mean, that was kind of like how they were against all the good teams, right? They weren't able. That was one of the big problems they had in the pre-Babbitt era, I'll call it.
Well, and against DC too, they had 3 breaks. In their other 2 games around that, they had 10. To give an example of how Boston is able to kind of punch down against competition that they know they can own in one-on-one space versus a Breeze team that has a very established system. Again, this gets back to kind of my point of Boston loves one-on-one matchups. One of the things that they're still evolving in is a system approach.
Yeah, but I think, the DC game, you can look at it that way, but you can also look at the fact that there were only, 23 goals scored total, so to break 3 times actually doesn't feel that bad when you put it in that perspective. I don't know.
It's just more the efficiency when it gets down to it for me. Like, sure. Glory have been almost rampaging over these other offenses, and against DC, they were 3 of 8, 38%. Like, that's not going to be enough to break through against the DCs and the New York of this division, which is what Boston has ultimately set their sights on in 2024.
Yeah, I think, although I do wonder about the Empire's offensive line, their ability to just get the disc back, though. And we saw in that Atlanta game that Atlanta's D-line was just moving the disc on New York's O-line without really that much pressure. It seemed like there was always an open player. When turnovers did happen for that Atlanta D-line, it was actually more them like taking shots than it was New York actually earning the disc back. Outside of a Ben Yacht layout D in the end zone, I don't really remember their offense really earning the disc back. It was more just waiting for, a missed huck from Atlanta's D-line. So, I mean, I kind of on that side of it, like, yeah, Boston has maybe struggled to break against the better teams, but I also feel like what we've seen in this Empire team so far early in the season is that they're not necessarily the best at getting the disc back. So it might be a situation where you have weakness on weakness, and we'll see which one's weaker in the moment. But I don't know. I feel like we're just gearing up for a prize fight where it's just gonna be two people just hitting each other in the face over and over again. It's not going to be pretty. I anticipate to be pretty low scoring. I think both teams are going to struggle a little bit offensively, given the talent of the defense is on the other side. And I favor Boston. Boston has looked better, I think, overall. We've got a little bit more data on them to suggest as much, and they are at home. They are, I think, closer to the lineup that we expect. They're missing some guys, but like Orion Cable's only played one game so far. I mean, they're basically running with the guys out there that you expect to be there for most of the games, where the Empire have a couple notable absences that I think they would really like to have for this weekend. So I give a slight edge to Boston, but it's not going to be pretty. I'm saying it now.
Yeah, I feel like it'll be pretty similar to how that DC Boston game went last weekend, where it's a little bit of a grudge match, for better way to put it. Both these teams kind of having a history, I think, outside of the particular Empire Glory matchup, and it just figures to be something different from what we've seen between these two franchises in the past few years. Boston is 3-1, sitting atop the division, and New York is coming off of their first loss in over 2 years. And to that point, New York hasn't lost back-to-back games since June 2018, when they lost in Toronto and then Montreal, who is their second opponent of this upcoming weekend. So there is a little bit of kismet in the air for this Empire team that continues to backslide in a way that we may have anticipated in sort of a worse end of the spectrum going into the season, given their losses. But quite frankly, I was not expecting this to be where we greeted the Empire coming into 2024.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shock. But man, no matter what happens in this game, I really think that Montreal game on Saturday is going to be just really dangerous for New York. They were already played really close by that Montreal team when Montreal was playing 2 road games and on the second day of a back-to-back. Them being at home they have one of the best crowds in the league.
They finally snapped their 19-game winning streak. There's it's such an inverse, right? Like New York ends their 31-game win streak. Montreal snaps their 19-game losing streak. Montreal is at home. New York might be coming off of their first ever loss at Boston. Like, there is a lot of just weird vibes to this one. I'm gonna say that there's just the weirdest vibes of any of the games in the New York at Montreal game on Saturday night.
I'm gonna say this. I can't guarantee which one it's gonna be, but New York is gonna have at least 2 losses when they come out this weekend, and I honestly don't know which game. I feel like almost an equal chance in each game, given the fact that the Montreal game is the second game on the weekend. So I'm gonna write it in ink. New York's got at least 2 losses after this weekend.
All right. I mean, Montreal's rookie Tobe Ducrane continues his just assault on this league. He's got 600 plus yards in all 3 of his first starts as a professional. He's going to be a total handful for New York, especially down JR on defense. So yeah, I feel like both New York games are going to be must-watch TV. But speaking of must-watch TV, let's shift from East to West Coast and talk about the Salt Lake Shred, who are currently sitting at 3-0, their big road trip through Oakland and Colorado. Let's start chronologically in Oakland on Friday night, and most notably with the Shred being down 2 of their offensive starters, in Grant Lindsley and Elijah Jaime, 2 of, I think, the better just operator gamers in this league. When you talk about 2 players who just kind of show up night in, night out when they are active in the lineup, that's going to be some major misses for a Salt Lake team that is going to be with their hands full again against the Spiders on Friday, who are sitting at 3-1 coming off of their 2-0 weekend in Portland and then Seattle in week 3. And then also, most notably, and we'll get to this in just a minute, against Colorado, who is bringing in an absolutely full strength lineup in their first appearance at Marquez Stadium this season. Colorado coming into their matchup on Saturday night 1-0. It will be interesting to see if Salt Lake keeps their record perfect or if they finally slip against the Spiders team that they've dispatched of quite handily in their first 2 seasons of play. Salt Lake actually had one of their most arduous matchups in Oakland last season. They escaped just 27-25, had their lowest defensive efficiency of the season, just 38% against a Spiders team that likes to give the disc away, but can be a little stout or tenacious in transition defense. Salt Lake also had 22 turnovers in Oakland. There's a weird kind of alchemy that happens for the Spiders in their home games between the SoCal wins and just the energy of that stadium. And so it'll be interesting to see if the Shred can manage all of that, intangible elements, given that they'll probably be looking ahead just a little bit, just slightly, to their matchup against the Summit on Saturday night.
Yeah, hopefully not looking too far ahead. Yeah, they are missing Lindsley and Jaime, which I think on the outside seems really huge, but I bet they're so happy to have Will Selfridge back. I'm
so happy they have Will Selfridge back.
They struggled in that 2-game road trip that they had in week 2. They only beat San Diego by 2, a team that looked like, if you would have looked at the week 1 results, seen San Diego get doubled up by Seattle, you would have assumed that Salt Lake was going to go in there and just, they'd walk out of there with a 10-goal win. And I mean, it was a close game. San Diego really tested them, and then they go and they got kind of a big lead early on LA, and LA kind of started clawing back a little bit. It turned into a 3-goal game by the end of it. And it really felt like their offense stalled out, especially in the red zone. They just didn't look as clean. I know Bryce Merrill talked in the preseason about how the new disc seemed to be giving them a little bit of some fits in the red zone in particular with some of these tighter throws that they like to make, maybe like these kind of in between, like over the top short throws. But to me, like going back and looking at that weekend, it really just seemed like Will Selfridge could have solved a lot of problems for them in those 2 games, just with his ability to get open and his motor just going constantly at all times. I think while you would love to have Jaime and Lindsley there, I think the fact that they have Selfridge gives them the boost that they need that looked like they were missing their last 2-game trip. And on the other hand, for Oakland, like missing someone like Chris Lung is currently questionable. He was an all-star in 2022.
Okay, can I just cut you off? I've got the full list of questionable and also outs for the Spiders, which is bordering on problematic. So
yes,
Eli Kearns is out, their World Games player, out. And then they have 7 players who are currently listed as either questionable or dressed, who are all pretty impact performers, starting with your aforementioned 2022 All-Star Chris Lung, as well as a captain in Connor Bauman, another defensive starter in Robin Vickers-Batsdorf, Sawyer Thompson, Walker Frankenberg, Keenan Lawrence, and Raekwon Adkins are also all listed as dressed, which is the most questionable of questionable listings I've learned as far as how teams report stuff. So yeah, that's a full lineup plus of basically starters that are up in the air for the Spiders against the runner-ups from last year who are still currently undefeated.
Yeah, and it's, Oakland has been feisty, right? Like I don't know what spunky, like all of the words like that, like
let's call them what they are, weird. It's a little weird for a team that commits 20 plus turnovers a game to be 3-1.
Yeah, and in a team that, they go up to, they're a team that they have those turnovers, but then they force that amount of turnovers. But then when they play Portland, who, we assume Portland is probably going to be some, at or near the bottom of the West, they have their lowest turnover performance offensively, but they also don't force as many turns. It's just like, they just want the close games. Like they can't get any separation for whatever reason. Doesn't matter who they're playing. They'll find a way, I'm sure, with even if all these players don't play, they'll find a way to keep it to a 1 or 2 goal game. Why? I don't know. This team doesn't make any sense. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. There's no stat I can dig into. There's nothing. It's just they just somehow get other teams to play with the same game plan that they're playing. Like it's like they are rope-a-doping everyone they play, like just falling into the trap of just keep doing what we're doing. Like I don't get it. I don't understand it, but it's been that way for a season plus now, and I'm not taking any chances that it's going to change, right now. So you mentioned the game last year Salt Lake had in Oakland. I remember watching that game. They were just trading score. It seemed like they were scoring in like 30 seconds or less. It was like a race to see who could score faster every time an offense received the disc. And it was just, they were just going down the field and scoring at will. And I do think if all of those players end up not playing, that does spell a lot of trouble for Oakland. But if they can just get a few of those players back, I think that gives them a fighting chance in this game, especially at home. But yeah, weird game, weird matchup. Who knows what's going to happen?
I always think of the Jeff Goldblum quote from the first Jurassic Park. Just finds a way. Life just finds a way. That's the Spiders team, man. I mean, they had a 44% offensive success rate on the road in Seattle, and they won. It was by 1 goal, but they won. And like Seattle, for all of their kind of confusion, sitting at 2-2, having squandered a terrific opportunity, getting that home win against Oakland. They're a team that I think when you give them defensive opportunities to get breaks, that's when they become really dangerous. And yet, here's this Oakland team, again, 44% offensive success rate, comes away with a win. Like, to your point about just not knowing how to analyze Oakland, they are a complete conundrum to me. I just think of them as a team that's able to win in the circumstances, but and I was thinking of it in this way too, of like they're able to bend a game to their style almost better than any other team in this league, but they don't even know how to play that style entirely. like to the point of how they kind of ended up at the end of 2023 when they dropped both road games by a single goal in LA and then in San Diego. It felt like they got into the realm of, hey, let's just play emotional trade back and forth haymakers and see who ends up standing at the end. And they were not the opponent. This year, they are the opponent standing up at the end. And so it'll be interesting to see how they square off against a Salt Lake team who wants to run a more pristine game, but I think has shown that they can kind of take off the gloves a bit and be a little bit more rough and tumble in as far as what a game gives them. I think that they proved that through their SoCal 2-0 weekend in week 2.
Yeah, and I mean, Salt Lake's also coming in with just like almost their full 20-man roster that they want to have too. Like they're in better shape roster wise. They've, you could make an argument that they're the favorites to win the title. I mean, they were the runner-up last year. They're 3-0 this year. I know we've talked about Carolina and how good they look, but Salt Lake, I guess in a lot of ways, maybe we should be talking more about them being the favorite based off what we saw last year and even early this year. The 2 games that they kind of didn't look as pristine in, well, they were missing some pieces, and on a 2-game road trip, like things like that happen. So I don't know. I think given the absences for Oakland and the potential absences that they might have, I think Salt Lake could definitely potentially run away with this, but Spiders find a way. So it's, they get the disc back is a big thing. Like you mentioned, their offensive line conversion percentage, it's under 50%. I mean, it's not good, but their hold percentage is up at 64%. I mean, they're getting the disc back. They are scrappy. It's so when they turn it over, they're not just rolling over and letting you go break them. Like they're getting the disc back a fair amount and then punching it in on, what we in Indy call a dirty hold, right? Where you've had a turnover or 2 and have gotten it back and end up punching it in. Still, they're able to do that, and they're able to do that about as well as any team in the league, actually. So if things are a little off, like you can kind of count on them to be scrappy and get the disc back. And we know that Salt Lake's D line sometimes they've been getting better, but sometimes they play a little fast and loose with it. So there will be opportunities for Oakland to earn the disc back should they turn it on offense.
Yeah, although the Shred defensive unit has been above 50% success rate in all three of their wins this season. So I think there's a little bit more pressure on their offense to sort of hold serve than what the defense has been providing. Because I think, to your point, they've been much more volatile in years past, but that's sort of been the refinement of Salt Lake's franchise since their inception in 2022, is going from just block it on a layout and then huck it immediately in transition in their first season to now there's a little bit more of an attack in that counter for the Shred. But we'll see how they fare on Friday night. But, I have to think that they're going to be susceptible to looking past that matchup because of what faces them on Saturday, which is an absolutely full-strength Colorado lineup. Returning Quinn Finer, all UFA talent, did not play in week 2 in Colorado's first game. Also making his Summit debut, Chance Cochran, a former gold medalist on a U24 team for Team USA. Like, this is the most tilted Summit roster I think we've seen since 2022. They're going to have an absolute revenge game in mind for this matchup, given that they dropped both games in 2023 by a single goal, basically on the last possession, particularly in their most recent matchup, which was intercepted in the end zone to end the game in Salt Lake last year in week 8. This Colorado team is no joke, man. Last year, again, they didn't quite get their sway against the Shred. They had just 9 total breaks in 2 games. And maybe more importantly, they were just 21 of 28 on red zone attempts, just 75% for a Colorado team that is usually way higher than that in this league. But to that point, they still just committed 27 total turns in those games against the Shred, just 16 in one game and then 11 in their most recent matchup. And that was even in an offense that felt very much not Summit. And I feel like given how they looked in week 2, even without Finer, the 2024 version of this Colorado team is going to be a much different beast for the Salt Lake team to handle in an even matchup, let alone coming off of what figures to be a tough Spiders battle on Friday night.
Colorado, man, they are so loaded. We were talking before we started recording about Logan Prius isn't playing. Like, is he just not available, or is he actually their 21st best player? And we were just like, I don't know. I'm not really sure. But we could see a world where he's not in their top 20, which is kind of crazy. Quinn Finer returning his lineup. I mean, he'll be making his debut. I'm really excited to see him. He's, he was my pick, or one of my picks for like a possible MVP this year.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
With Quinn Finer in the lineup, and given what we saw from Colorado in week 2 against Seattle, and given kind of the, I would say, downturn of some of the other offenses that we would consider elite in Atlanta and New York so far this season, and even Salt Lake a little bit, is this Summit offense with Finer in it the most explosive in the league? I mean, you talk about Finer, Alex Atkins, Noah Kuhlman, and Saeed Semrin switching over and looking like absolute beasts in that lineup. They can switch in Alex Tatum if they want. They're going to be debuting Jeremy Knopf this weekend. Like, they have an embarrassment of riches. I haven't even mentioned the name Lord Nethercutt yet, who they're swapping on both lines. Like, this Summit team is dangerous, man.
Yeah, they are dangerous. The fact that they can afford to throw a guy like Jay Fruit over in defense and it doesn't feel like a bad move. Like, it is pretty insane. I think they're similar to Carolina in where they just feel like a group of 20 guys going out there, and you could almost like pick 7 different guys to go out there on offense every time, and you would be like, yeah, that looks like a really strong O-line. And it could just be any 7 random guys put together. And like, yeah, that line's probably going to go score. My biggest questions will be about, like, do they get a little overzealous in their deep game? We've seen that happen before in some big games where they start relying on the deep game too much, and they don't. When they do that, when they're like super high volume in the deep game, it doesn't always pan out percentage wise. In the first game of the season against Seattle, they didn't do that. They definitely took advantage of the deep game, but they didn't rely on it. It wasn't something that they weren't taking bad shots. Like, every shot was in rhythm to
No,
like
but
a one-on-one matchup.
They connected on 12 of 15. They were 80% from deep and filled it up with volume.
Yeah, but it was like not forced, right? Like, we've seen this Colorado team in the past force deep shots just because, oh, hey, Nethercutt can throw it a country mile. Let's just go ahead and have him do that. And it's not always the best look, but it felt like all the looks that they took against Seattle were in rhythm to open receivers. I remember one of the incompletions. It was like the rookie from Seattle going up and just taking it straight out of Kuhlman's hands, right? Like, he was just
Cedar Hines, another one of those teens that they produce out of Seattle, like John Randolph or Declan Miller, Zeppelin Roneg, or whoever. They just kind of have an incubator set aside, and they go, "Oh, here's the next big thing that's going to come up."
Yep. So outside of like that one play, like, which was a great play by Cedar Hines, and like, yeah, 80% of your deep shots with 15 shots taken, like, that's pretty amazing. But it didn't feel like it has in the past, where they've taken a lot of deep shots, and it felt like all 15 were reasonable shots to good matchups, like good spots. And
can I boil your noodle for a second, though?
Yeah.
Last year against Salt Lake, they completed double-digit hucks in both matchups, and at 67% in their most recent game, and then 69%, nice, in their first matchup against Colorado in 2023. Like, they had success deep, and to your point, it didn't feel like it impacted the Shred defense in the way that Colorado's deep attack normally does.
Well, Salt Lake's a good team, right? So, like, yeah, you're converting a high percentage, but, like, I mean, both those were 1-goal games. It's not like they weren't, so you got to take that into account too. Like, how is their defense playing? Because their defense wasn't able to really stop Salt Lake, which was kind of more of the problem. Offensively, they were playing well.
No, I'll push back there. In the second matchup, they actually were able to stall Salt. No, sorry, in the first matchup, they were able to stall Salt Lake in Colorado. That was when the Colorado defense were still primarily at full strength. In the second matchup, Salt Lake made adjustments.
That was before Simran got hurt, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
But what Salt Lake did so well against Colorado last year was take advantage of opportunities. On defensive opportunities in both games, they were 13 of 17, 76% on break chances against the Summit. And maybe most crucially, 25 of 27 on red zone looks. So getting that volume, and in their first matchup last year, if I remember correctly, they were perfect in the red zone. And that is a big difference from where the Shred are playing and where you started off in your analysis of them at the top of this segment, which is that their red zone efficiency has plummeted a bit. Right now in 2024, the Shred currently sit at 12th, converting just at 77%. Last year, they were in the top 2 at DC, converting above 85%. Again, 93% against Colorado last year. Is that a rate that they can hold? And specifically, I wonder, without Lindsley and Jaime in the lineup, who are 2 of their more central operators in some of those spaces. Lindsley isn't always the finisher as far as throwing, but man, he sets up a ton of stuff with his hockey assist potential.
I think the level that Will Selford showed in that first game, I think he'll help a lot of that. They still got Jordan Kerr, who is as dangerous in the red zone area as anyone, as both a thrower and receiver. I'm not super worried, but no, I think it doesn't even have to do with the personnel, right? Just like expecting any team against this Colorado defense that we're expecting to see to convert at a 90% rate. It would be just unreasonable. They're healthy, for now they're healthy. They have so many bodies to throw out there. the missing Lindsley and Jaime certainly isn't going to help. Also, being the second day of a road trip, like, you have to imagine that's going to affect in some way the level of play of Salt Lake, even if it's just in minor ways. That's all you need for a team as talented as Colorado to be able to take care of or to take advantage of them. But yeah, I expect that Salt Lake will definitely not reach the 93% mark. They're not going to be perfect in the red zone. There are going to be mistakes made. It'll be about, it might really just fall onto how well can each offense get the disc back. I don't anticipate a ton of turnovers in this game from the offenses. So I think it's really going to come down to which offense can, when they do turn it over, which I don't expect to happen a lot, can get the disc back and keep their team from breaking. And as you mentioned in one of the games last year, that's kind of really where Colorado struggled, is they couldn't really get the disc back. So can it get the disc back? I mean, they definitely have the athleticism and the defensive capabilities. It doesn't seem to be a reason they shouldn't be able to get it back, even with Salt Lake being a little more patient defensively and converting at a bit of a higher rate than maybe they have in the past. You gotta tell me that like guys like Quinn Finer and Alex Atkins can't go, and Noah Coolman can't go get the disc back. Like, they definitely can. If Saeed Simran's out there too, especially, like, those are like, between Simran and Coolman, you might have two of the top like 10 to 15 individual defenders in the league. Like,
they led the team last year in blocks. They tied for the Colorado lead in takeaways.
And they didn't, and Simran didn't even play half the season, right? So it's like, there you go.
He looks different this year, man. He's been coming on for a minute. I know he was the Callahan nomination coming out of Colorado when he graduated 2-3 years ago. But man, it feels like he's hitting that mid-20s stride of really realizing his powers, kind of realizing his physical dimension as a player. And that was going to get into one of my two questions, kind of to ask you, or maybe to just ponder on if you don't necessarily have an answer in this matchup. What does Salt Lake do with Colorado's size? I worry a bit about that for the Shred. We saw it against LA a little bit. We saw it in the last 3 quarters. The Aviators won each of the last 3 quarters, even though they lost the game. So it's kind of like a Boston Celtics NBA stat. We won the most quarters. LA won the past 3 quarters, and it was kind of by big boying Salt Lake in space a bit. This Salt Lake team has, I think, a lot of athletes, a lot of potential, but without Joel Clutton this season, and with kind of a reliance on Kyle Weinberg on defense for that big presence, I feel like there are opportunities for the Summit team to find matchups that they like, that they can just sort of body and own a bit as far as what they want to do and how they want to leverage it. That was going to be my first question, or sort of first rumination point. The second would be, can Colorado dispossess the zone that Jordan Kerr is in, not only in his matchups against Colorado, but how he's playing this season? I mean, he's got 2 turnovers in their first 3 games. He's completed 85 passes. He's last year against Colorado, he averaged 6 scores a game, 363 total yards, and a single turnover. And he's just entering this era of his career where he is minimizing any of his mistakes and taking advantage of anything that he is given. Can Colorado find something to get him out of that zone?
So I think to your first question, when you have a size disadvantage, you have to try to beat, in my opinion, those teams with speed and quickness. Like, yeah, you can have big guys and be like, oh, but this big guy is like still like really fast, or he's really quick, but you're always going to have that advantage as a smaller guy, just like that initial change in direction. I actually love when I have a sizable defender on me, a guy who might be 4 or 5 inches taller than me, because I find that I can just I can get open at will in the small spaces. And you do that enough, you start to draw that defender in to get closer in those spaces. And that's when you can kind of take advantage of like stretching to different parts of the field. And I think like you just got to play smart when you're playing against somebody who's like big and athletic. and might even have some speed. I think if you're Salt Lake, like the thing you're known for, like offensively, is being able to play fast, right? Like being able to move the disc, change attacking angles, and that's how you're going to beat a team who's like maybe bigger than you. And obviously, like, don't throw jump balls. Like that kind of goes without saying, but defensively, when you're at a size disadvantage, I mean, it's kind of the opposite. You just try to stay on their hip and stay close. And just anytime that a disc is going up deep, when you're not going to probably win that battle, it's beating them to the spot. So they have to take off from spaces where they don't want to take off from, right? Like, don't let them get to a spot where they can high point it. Make them get to a spot where they have to kind of reach over you to get it, or where they have to run around you to get to it, so they don't have the momentum going into their leap. Like, you have to find different ways like that to gain advantages. But I'm not really too worried, because Salt Lake has so much speed that they can overcome that. And as far as Jordan Kerr, I mean, I think that's kind of a lost cause to focus on Kerr, honestly. I think you just got to be like, yep, Jordan's going to get his. Like, he's going to touch the disc. He's going to be efficient with it. He's probably not going to have very many turnovers, if any. But what you try to do is limit the next pass. Like, okay, like Jordan's going to get the disc somewhere, but how can we make sure that when he gets it, he just doesn't have as many options available to him up the field? And I think that's really where you have to focus yourself as a defense, because there's not a player in the league, I don't think, that's just going to like keep him from getting the disc. We saw a couple years ago in the
Well, there was
game,
one, but he retired for Colorado.
I was just about to bring that up. I was like, Cody Spicer is a guy who has given him troubles, but a little bit in terms of just being able to get open, but he's not there. And in
that mold, and somebody who wasn't healthy for them last year, Kai Marshall. That's who I keep looking at that is active in the Summit lineup. He's 6'5", and he can run, and he's healthy again this year. We talked about extensively the defensive starters that were absent from the Summit lineup last year, and he just figures to be somebody. Also, with Finer active, I'm really curious as to who gets swapped back over to defense. Is that
Semrin?
Is it Semrin or Kuhlman? I don't know, man.
I think that's my guess. My guess is Semrin. I think as much as he looked better as a thrower in that first game, I still think Kuhlman is a little bit better with the disc in his hands. And I think Semrin is, they're both so valuable.
Semrin's such a big target, man. Like,
they don't need another big target. That's the thing. What they need, like, right? They don't need another big target. Like, they don't need
I think they do. I think they do a little bit. I think he gives them a dimension that they haven't really had before. Look, to take nothing away from the Finer, Freuds, Landesmans, Matt Jacksons, all the goal scorers for this Colorado team, they haven't really had a tight end target like Semrin, who is mobile, agile, hostile downfield. I don't know, man. He looked like he added something to that offense last year. I don't disagree with you. I'm not trying to disagree with you about putting him on defense. Not last year, last week. Or 2 weeks ago, I should say. Now I'm getting all confused. But Semrin makes sense spelling over to defense. I just really liked what I saw from him on offense.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's fantastic. I think he'd be a fine player for them on offense. But I think when you're definitely not keeping Finer off the line. And when you look across the rest, what the rest of what people can do, I mean, they still have, maybe they don't have a guy as big as Semrin, but I mean, Alex Atkins is not a small guy. And to your point, like, they have plenty of people who can get the disc in the end zone. I don't think they really, like, it's almost like having him over there is like a luxury, right? Like, to have somebody that big. But like, we've seen lots of offenses in this league be like one of the tops in the league without having, I mean, look at Salt Lake. They don't have that guy, right? They don't have some big guy like that. And they were, as efficient as any team in the league last year. So
they had to flip over Joel Clutton in the championship game last year. And in the West Division finale, the last 2 times they were eliminated in order to get a big release valve downfield. So I'm going to push back.
If you want to go watch that game against Colorado, that also just turned into literally, let's throw the jump ball to Joel Clutton and hope that he comes.
That was awesome, man. I wish that would happen more.
It worked for a little bit.
Works really well. I'm just saying, I think it's one of those things where, for whatever reason in the sport, there's sort of a cuteness around just having a big target in the end zone, just having a big boy who can go shield out and get the disc. I mean, you look at how Atlanta has evolved with Holzmeyer. You look at what New York was with Babbitt, and now Boston having just a solid piece who's kind of impossible to move out of where he wants to go to. That's how Sumrin felt a bit against Seattle, who was playing him physically and trying to move him out of his spot. He just sort of charged up against him. I mean, he basically got a technical for over celebrating on a goal. And it's one of those times where it's like, take the foul, big guy. We need you fired up. Big dog got to eat.
Trying to play physical with Simran kind of feels like me trying to go play physical with Nikola Jokic.
Little bit. Yeah.
What are you hoping to gain? I have 47 points, brother. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, he's got those big Pit Viper shades on, too. Like, it's a whole vibe with him, man. But again, wrapping up that segment, the game of the week, Salt Lake at Colorado on Saturday night on Watch UFA TV. Basically can't miss television. That'll wrap up the first 3 games we preview in this episode, but we've still got 8 more on the slate, including your matchup with Atlanta, which will be very important for both Central and South Division results. But given that we're already an hour in, and given that there's so much else to get to, I wanted to pose the question to you. You can include your own team in this. Don't feel shy around that. What team can sort of improve their lives the most with a win this weekend? We were going through the slate in the pregame, and of these other 8 games, it sort of feels like in a majority of them, and excuse me, a little bit in the Indy matchup, some foregone conclusions as to who the winner will be. And I'll go through those matchups. We've got Portland at San Diego on Friday, New York at Montreal on Saturday, and we talked earlier about how that's probably a little bit more volatile than maybe on paper it would look. Atlanta at Indy, which I would also put in that category for not only your sake, but just in general. I feel like you guys have been struggling a little bit against Atlanta, but they are down a few starters. You are playing at home. They are coming off of a historic win and then another big brother loss to Carolina. And so they're kind of in a weird quagmire state, I feel like. Very talented team, but hustle kind of a little bit in the shuffle as far as how they respond. Philadelphia at DC. Philadelphia looking to avenge their 12-goal loss from 2 weeks ago against the Breeze. Madison at Detroit. Madison will be down a lot of starters on the road at a Detroit team looking to snap a historic losing streak. Pittsburgh at Minnesota. Thunderbirds have not traditionally fared well in the land of lakes the past few seasons. Figures to be a very stout defensive performance for the home team, but who knows? Houston at Dallas. Houston, of course, winning the first matchup of those 2 Texas teams this season. And then rounding out the last of the 8 games we mentioned, Portland at LA. Both teams still looking for their first win of the season. So, of those 8 games, which of those teams can improve their stock the most with a win?
So I think there's a number of different ways you can go here. If you're talking about straight up like perception of the teams, I think that's a different answer than if you're going with like racing for the playoffs, right? Because like perception wise, I think our matchup with Atlanta probably carries the most weight, because if Atlanta wins that game, they can, get to 500 and show that they can, not just like New York's not the only team they can beat. Like that's kind of the funny thing, right? They really haven't been that close in their 2 games with Carolina, and then they had a big win against New York. Obviously for us, like if we beat Atlanta, that looks really good for us. Like people probably take us a little more seriously than I would say teams currently are, and maybe move us up into kind of that upper tier of teams, like upper, 10, 8 to 10 teams. But like playoff wise, probably doesn't really affect either one of us very much. Like we would be very shocked if Atlanta didn't make the playoffs, given the fact that there's only 5 teams in that division and 2 of them are Dallas and Houston. And, it's an out of division game for both of us. I think you could look at the Philly DC Breeze game. If Philly, after looking pretty terrible in their first 2 games, somehow managed to go beat DC, that would first off put like some life into their season. But also just completely shift maybe our perspective of them. Like, okay, maybe because it's starting to look, after just 2 games, I am pretty much ready to just give up on Philadelphia. But if they were to somehow muster up a win in DC, that would be eye-opening. But I'm going to go actually with LA is probably the one I'm looking at the most. LA is 0-2 right now. This is a team that definitely had aspirations of contending for a playoff spot and being that 3rd team in the playoffs out west. They're 0-2 right now, and they have a home game against Portland. If they don't win this game, you can write off any chances at making the playoffs. So I think this game is crucial for them. They need to get on the winning side of things. If they aren't able to this weekend, if Portland goes in and wins that game, I think LA can pretty much write off their season at that point.
It's a good pick. That's a good pick. I feel like the Indy against Atlanta perception pick is good. I think those are all valid. But man, it's right there in your face. It's Montreal and New York. It's Montreal and New York. It's 1000% Montreal and New York. Because look, if New York somehow drops Friday and they go into Montreal on Saturday 1-2, Montreal could improve to 2-2, and the reigning champs could fall to 1-3, which would be absolute pandemonium. Do you realize that? We are on the very brink of a kind of reality that is so far adrift of anything any of us had seen even 6 weeks ago.
Yep.
That's the chaos button I want to push, is somehow the sequence of events where Boston wins on Friday and then the Royale just punch a downtrodden New York team, and then we end up with some version of East standings that is Boston, DC, Montreal. And New York on the precipice of a real weird season. So the other thing I wanted to get into was the upcoming schedules for some of these teams. In particular, I just wanted to mention Colorado's next 5. So, they face Salt Lake on Saturday night. They get a little bit of a favorable matchup there, and that's probably good for them because their next 5 are at home against Atlanta in a Super Series game on May 31st, then at Oakland, at Salt Lake, at Madison, at Minnesota. So if the Summit don't take care of business at home this Saturday against the Salt Lake team playing their second game in as many nights, it really figures like the Summit could enter into the kind of thresher that happened last year, where they started off 5-0 and then ended up losing a majority of their back end games, including a first round game at home.
I get that the Montreal game is big, but man, can you just I can't even imagine going back in time to us on this podcast and just being like, oh, hey, Montreal might be ahead of New York in the standings after 4 weeks.
I'm saying, it would absolutely tilt everything, because it's one of those things where in so many other aspects of the sport, there are the ELO rankings, there's the algorithm, there's sort of strength of schedule that plays into everything. You can take rounds off in tournaments. There's all these ways to sort of analyze what is best. But one of the things that I like about the pro model is that it's just wins and losses at the end of the day. That's what advances you. And so, yeah, man, if Montreal simply edges above New York, it just feels like, to Evan Lepler's kind of question in one of his recent Tuesday tosses, end of an era after they lost at Atlanta, New York did. That would be, to me, the true dawning of something past the New York dynasty, is them falling to even 2-2, I think, and Montreal maybe getting above them in a head-to-head tiebreaker. Like, it would just be a significant departure from my kind of epistemology of this league, right? Like, where I come from understanding the relative comparative analysis of how teams stack up against each other. Like, if Montreal tilts over New York, it's just kind of, oh, new day. Like, we just need to wipe the slate clean and sort of say, hey, anyone has a chance here.
Do you think if New York loses both games this weekend, and I'm going to go ahead and say Philly's going to lose. I feel pretty confident saying that. Do you think there's going to be a tweet from Philly about how they're only one game behind New York in the standings?
Maybe. I just don't know what that means at any point. And to Philly's credit, as much as it's been just a total lights out quality on offense, their defense kept them in that game through the third quarter. They were only down a couple against Boston this past weekend, but
well, they were up 5-2. Early, it looked like, oh, Philly's woken up.
They scored 5 goals in the first quarter, and then they scored 5 goals in the remaining 3. And It's one of those things too where they lost the final quarter against a team playing its second game in a back-to-back, and they were playing their first game of the weekend at home. So, but we don't have to linger too long on that. I want to get your just one last impression about your game against Atlanta, because I think that is a matchup that has been on the undercard heading into this weekend, but I don't think it should be, given how both teams take themselves seriously.
Yeah, they're down Christian Olsen and Matt Smith. We're down Lucas Canieres this week. So we're both down some offensive firepower. But we're excited. Last year we went in and played Atlanta first game of the season. We had I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say 5 or 6 players making their debuts in that game, which is probably not the ideal situation for someone playing their first game, 8-hour road trip against a team who, figured to be one of the better teams in the league. And, we made some changes on offense, and it showed. I mean, we went down there and they kicked our butts. We went down there the year before and we were shorthanded and actually had a really competitive game with them. We are using this game as a huge measuring stick for us. We're really excited. We feel confident going into the game. We know we can compete with them. But we're also implementing a lot of new things this year. For anyone who watched our game, you'll know what I'm talking about. But just new offense and new style play, and we're really excited to be able to put that into action against a team we really respect. And we give a lot of credit to Atlanta. We know they're a really good team, and they're going to be at mostly full strength. I know they had a number of absences last week, and they're not going to have as many this week. So I don't know. I'm excited. I love playing against good opponents. Like, honestly, I would love to draw like the Justin Burnett matchup. I love going up against like great defenders that I have a lot of respect for. Just think it makes me a better player. And I feel like I always get better and learn through that. And I just love the challenge. So like, I don't know who I'm going to have on me, but it'll be fun.
Yeah, that would be quite the matchup, man. You were looking spry out there. I think that's the word I have to use with you, given your age now, is spry. But seriously, man, you've got your first step back. That was like an explosiveness I haven't seen from you in a couple seasons. So I'm really looking forward to you also testing your mettle against this tough Atlanta defense, who has backed some of their big defensive starters. But that will do it for this episode of Swing Pass, this Week 4 preview pod. We will be back with you in just a couple days to recap all of the action. Thank you for tuning in here and now. We will talk to you soon. Bye now.
Madison, Wisconsin, the capital city of ultimate.
There's no doubt the crowd and energy and that momentum is contagious when you're on the road, right?
We have a little bit of an experience here, and we've taken care of this team a couple of times in the past.
Skying through the contact for the score.
Like it was nothing.
He was on.
Oh my gosh!
That's to Callahan. Andrew Mechanic to tie the game. be a gigantic moment for Madison.